Welcome everyone, and especially those who have just arrived as well. Welcome, glad you could join us today. So my name is Zach, and my background is in games and gamification. So mainly I started in research and academia, and so have lectured on the topic of gamification and have done a PhD on the topic of gamification, which was really interesting, looking at how games can motivate people. But then since then I've also designed gamification for businesses, for government, and also go around and talk a lot about gamification as well. But importantly though, I have a long history in games, and here's some proof to share that. Here's me back at a young age playing a Nintendo 64. So as you can see, I was quite into games at an early age. So I started playing quite young, and by the age of 12, I was designing my first games as well. The games weren't very good, but they were still fun to be able to jump in and start making games because it was becoming a lot easier back then. I have a number of favorite different games. The list is too many to share, but one of my favorite ones that I'm playing at the moment, I just like to share a game with everyone, is called Sushi Go. It's a board game. So I play a lot of video games, but I also like board games quite a lot. Board games are great because they bring people together around a table. You can socialize and have fun with friends. And so this is the one that I'm playing at the moment, and it's probably my favorite. It's a game where you have little sushis. You have to collect them and get sets of sushis in order to get the most points. So at this point, I like to get people just to say hello in the chat box. So if you could just jump into the chat, say hello, and I would love you to share a game that you've recently played that you like. Or just one of the most recent games you've played. It's a good excuse to get game recommendations, but it's also nice to see what people are playing as well. So if you can, jump into the chat box and just type hello and share with me your favorite game that you're playing at the moment. And I'll come back and look at those in a little bit. So today we have a jam-packed session full of information. I'm going to be covering a number of different things, and I thought I'd just step through exactly what we're going to be talking about today to begin with. So what we'll start with is a brief introduction to gamification. So for those of you who have heard of gamification or may not have heard of gamification, going through and providing you with this introduction will help get you up to speed in terms of what exactly gamification is and how it can be applied to different areas. And I'm going to be sharing some examples of great gamification with you as well. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into how we can actually design gamification for the particular behaviors and the particular areas that we'd like to promote behavior change. And to begin with, to do that, we need to, rather than jumping in and designing gamification straight away, we need to understand the behavior that we're trying to change or promote. And to do that, we need to look at identifying the behavioral goals that we want to tackle. The next thing we want to do is understand our players. And so these are the people who are going to be using our gamified system. We need to understand a little bit about who they are before we jump in and then finally design some gamification. And then I'm going to finally share with you some tips on how to build your gamification prototype, maybe in a day or maybe in a week. So to get something built very quickly so you can get it out there and test it with people and actually make it happen. So that is the game plan for today. A lot to cover, so let's dive right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is what exactly is gamification. But before we begin, I want you to stop for a second and imagine this. So this morning, pretend you're on the train to work and you step off the platform in the subway, and all of a sudden you are faced with a very, very important choice. The choice is whether you take the stairs or whether you take the escalator. What do you do? So you know you should probably take the stairs because it's better for you. It's good to get some exercise every day, and the stairs are a great form of exercise. At least, walking up a few flights of stairs can definitely be helpful. But however, the escalator is calling as well. You just have to stand on it and it will take you all the way up like magic. Needless to say, when we're faced with this kind of decision, most people would probably take the escalator, including myself sometimes. It's definitely a more easier and more convenient option because you can just stand there and it will take you to the top. But in a world where we struggle to get enough exercise, wouldn't it be better if we were more motivated to add a little bit more activity to our day by taking the stairs? So how could we do this? How could we encourage people to take the stairs instead of the escalator? Well, I came up with a number of ideas. So the first idea I came up with is we could put a out of order sign on the escalator. That could possibly work. We could make the escalator just go down instead of up, or we could potentially remove the escalator altogether. Now, these are all ideas. Whether they're good ideas or not is questionable, and sometimes there are legitimate cases when people need to actually use the escalator. So these ideas probably are not the best if we're taking away the escalator. So what else can we do? Well, some designers in Sweden came up with an interesting idea that didn't involve demolishing the escalator, but instead focused on trying to make the stairs more enjoyable to use. And many of you might have seen this example already, but I love coming back to this example because it's such a great example of using play to motivate people. And so what they did was, instead of focusing on the escalator, they focused on the stairs and tried to make the stairs more fun and enjoyable to use. And so what they did was they turned the stairs into a giant piano. So as you can see, it looks like a piano here. But what's more interesting is as you go up and step and walk up the stairs, the stairs actually make a sound of the piano. So you can actually play piano as you're walking up the stairs. And these are a fantastic example of playful design. So they draw upon curiosity to encourage commuters to try something different. And if you go and watch the video after this, so if you go and do a search for the video, so just jump into YouTube and search for piano stairs, it's really interesting to watch the effect that they have on encouraging people to take the stairs. And what's nice is that some people take the stairs as usual, but some people actually stay on the stairs. They go up, they go down again, up and down again. They're playing on the stairs as well. So they're actually getting more exercise than they would if they were just to take the stairs normally. So these piano stairs are an incredible example of using the power of play to motivate people. And that is exactly the same kind of thinking behind the concept of gamification. That is using play to motivate us, except that gamification draws more specifically upon video game design. So the reason for this, why? It's because video games are hugely engaging, and we're going to look at some stats in just a second as well about just how engaging some video games can be. But before we do that, I just want to talk about where gamification sits. So gamification is interesting. It's considered as a subset of behavior change design. So we have this very large overarching area of behavior change design, and gamification is one element or one subset of that. So behavior change design is a very large field with many different areas, domains, models, and theories that draw from psychology, from behavioral economics, from user experience design. And there are a lot of ways to explain behavior change, but one of my favorite comes from the researcher B.J. Fogg from Stanford University. So in his research, he's proposed essentially a model, and this model is a great way to start this conversation about behavior, because essentially he explains that a behavior happens when three things occur at the same time. So this is something that we're doing, a behavior that we're doing. When these three things happen at the same time, a behavior is performed. So these three things are, we need the motivation to perform the behavior. So we personally need to be motivated to perform the behavior. We might have some motivation, whether we're hungry, we probably have the motivation to go eat some food, if that's the behavior. We need to have the ability to perform the behavior. So that is the behavior has to be easy, or we have to be able to perform the behavior. And the third thing that we need is that we need to be prompted to perform the behavior. We need to be reminded. And whether the reminder is internal, from say our stomach rumbling, telling us that we're hungry, or from someone, from an external prompt as well. So, whether we smell some food or something, we have a prompt which reminds us to then perform the behavior. So these three things are super important. And when they come together, I guess in terms of these three things, a behavior is generally performed. So he's got this great model, as you can see here. And what it essentially says is that you've got the green action line in the middle. And in order for an action or behavior to be performed, you need the combination of these three things. You need either a high level of motivation, you need a high level of ability, or so something is easy to do, and you need a prompt to tell you. The problem is that we generally won't perform the generally won't perform the behavior if, for example, our motivation is low and if the task or the behavior is difficult to do as well, or if we're not prompted to perform the behavior. Okay, so we'll dive into this a little bit later, but generally I just wanted to show you that we need these three things in order to perform a behavior. That is the motivation, so we need to be motivated, we need the ability to perform the behavior, and we need the prompt as well, so we need to be reminded. So when it comes to behavior change design, you can focus on making either or any of these three elements more easier, I guess. So you can look at making something easier to do, you can look at reminding someone to do something, or you can look at promoting motivation. With gamification, we're focusing on all three, but predominantly we're interested in making an experience more motivating. So this is what we're going to be focusing on today, is motivation. So how can we make people more motivated, or how can we promote motivation in order to lead to a change in behavior? Now, motivation can be one of the hardest things to change. We all have different motivations and there's all these different things at play. So it's worthwhile exploring the other two things first to see if there are quick wins that you can achieve before looking at motivation. So can you make a task easier to do, and can you make sure to prompt someone? But if that doesn't work, then we can look at how we can promote motivation. Now, there are various ways to motivate people. We can look at doing things such as promoting habit forming, using behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, design thinking. But what we're here interested in today looking at is gamification. So gamification has its roots in video games. It goes back to the concept of video games and how they can be incredibly engaging, and looks at what makes these video games engaging and tries to apply that to the real world. Now, let's talk about video games in particular, because a lot of people generally have stereotypes when it comes to thinking about video games and thinking about the people who play video games. So the average gamer, I'm just interested, I just want everyone to kind of close their eyes for a second and to think about what the average gamer in their mind looks like. So, what do you think of when you hear the word gamer? For a lot of people, it might look like this, where it's a young, probably child or male who is probably playing video games all by themselves in their basement all day. But it's interesting. This is not quite the stereotype that people think. This is not actually what the stereotype of. Sorry, this is not what the real reflection of gamers are. So have a think now. I want you to think or take a guess how you think how old the average gamer is. So you can either write this down or you can post it in the chat box, but have a think. How old do you think the average gamer is? And you might be a little bit surprised, because if we look at how old the average gamer is, it's actually 34 years, at least in Australia, where I'm from. So what's interesting is we often think of young people are the people who predominantly play video games, but in actual fact, it's middle-aged people. So the average age is 34 years old. And what's more interesting, I think, is that 43% of people aged 65 and over play video games. So we actually have a very large older demographic of people who play video games as well. Now, when it comes to the number of people who play video games, we often think of maybe it's just a small subset, maybe it's nerds, or people who play video games is just a small group. But in actual fact, there's a very large number of people who play video games. Again, looking at some of these statistics from Australia, where I'm from, 67% of Australians play video games. So 2/3 of all Australians play video games. So it's quite a lot of people who are actually playing video games. But I think what is the most interesting piece of data that has come from some of the research is just how much time we spend playing video games. And what's really interesting is that we are playing video games quite a lot, and there's we're playing it every day as well. And so again, if we go back and look at Australia, the average amount of video game play time that occurs is 89 minutes every day. So about the same amount of time of a full-length feature film, people are sitting down and playing video games on average for about that time as well. So what this tells us is that a lot of people play video games. It's not just children who play video games, it's many adults as well. And we're spending quite a bit of time engaging with these video games. So these video games can be very engaging. Now, there are some video games which are more engaging than others, and I just want to talk about one video game in particular. And this game is World of Warcraft. It was first released in 2004, and people are still playing it these days. Some economists tried to work out or calculate how much time people have spent in this one game alone. And this is an old statistic, so people have been playing World of Warcraft a lot since then, but the closest statistic I could find was from 2012. So if we go back there, economists estimated that we had spent 50 billion hours of time playing World of Warcraft, which is about 6 million years of game time, which is about as much time as we've spent evolving as a human species, which is incredible if you just stop and think about it for a moment, that we've spent 6 million years of combined time in this one game. So this is quite amazing, because if this one game can engage us for such a long amount of time, just think about how much time we're spending in all the other games as well. And on top of that, we see some really interesting new games which are starting to appear, which take or make good use of the device technologies, the sensor technologies that are starting to appear. And one of my favorite examples is Pokemon Go. And what's interesting is that this is quite different from a traditional game. So Pokemon Go, you have to go out into the real world, you have to walk around, find Pokemon, catch them, and undertake steps or walk steps in order to hatch different Pokemon. And what's interesting about this is we often think of video games being something which you sit down and you're quite lazy and you're playing video games just in front of a computer or a TV. But this one actually motivates people to get out and about. And what's interesting is that this video game, even though it's not specifically built to motivate people to exercise, it did have the effect of promoting exercise for people as well. And so there was a really interesting research article that looked at the influence of Pokemon Go on physical activity, and they estimated that in 3 months of game time, that this game alone added 144 billion steps to US physical activity. So you can see the impact that some of these new games are having as well, especially these augmented reality games. So it's quite interesting. Games are no longer tied to videos, to computers and to TVs. They're getting us out and about in the real world as well. So the idea is that if games are so engaging, games like World of Warcraft or games like Pokemon Go, then how can we use the design thinking that went into these games to our advantage and apply it to other contexts to make those contexts more motivating and engaging as well? And this is the whole idea behind gamification design. So gamification, probably the best definition or the most popular definition for gamification, is the addition of game elements to non-game activities. But when we talk about game elements, we're not just talking about the visual aesthetics of games, we're also talking about game design practices, game design theories, game design models, and the approach that we take when designing games and applying that to other areas as well. And so what's interesting is, as of 2010, around that time when mobile phones started to become more popular and we could measure more information about people, so we could get people's location, we could work out how many steps people had taken, we started to see more and more game elements or game design aspects creep into our everyday apps. And so gamification became more and more popular about 10 years ago. So we saw many regular applications like these ones, like to-do lists, exercise trackers, and social networks, all of a sudden being augmented with game elements to make them more motivating. So all of a sudden your everyday tasks were now quests you could do on your to-do list. You could be chased by zombies on your run, or you could compete with your friends on your social network to see who could visit the most places and check into them. So I want to share some of my favorite examples of gamification over the last 10 years with you, just to give you an idea of how broad the spectrum of gamification actually is. We'll start with the fitness space. So in the fitness space, here's one that you may have heard of. It's called Fitbit. You may have actually received one of these back in the day. It's a device that tracks primarily how many steps that you've taken during the day, as well as your exercise that you've undertaken, and it encourages you to reach a step goal. And then they added game elements such as badges, a leaderboard, so you can compare how many steps you took to your friends and your family to see who got the most steps every day. And you could have competitions as well. Now, this was interesting. I didn't mind Fitbit. It was nice to get the feedback of how many steps I've done during the day, because that can be quite motivating, because you can look at it and be like, okay, I've only done 2,000 steps today. I need to do a lot more in order to reach my goal of 10,000. But it wasn't the most motivating for me. I found a different gamified app that I preferred a lot, and I'm going to share that one with you now. It's called Zombies Run. And I want to mention this one because it's one of my favorite examples of gamification. If I'm a little unmotivated to run, then I may use this particular app. So Zombies Run, basically you plug in your headphones and it creates a story for you where you are one of the characters in a zombie apocalypse. And the other characters are talking to you as if you are in the zombie apocalypse with them. So you go out for a run, put your headphones in, and as you run, the story unfolds of this zombie apocalypse that you're living in. But what's interesting as well is, more importantly maybe for some people, is that it includes virtual zombie chases to encourage you to run faster. And so what happens is, sometime during your run, you'll start to hear zombies breathing down the back of your neck, and at that point in time, you have to start running faster. So it uses the GPS sensor inside of it to work out how fast you're running, and you need to speed up and run faster. And if you don't run fast enough, then the zombies get you and you lose all the items that you've collected, which can be absolutely terrifying if you're out and about and running in the real world and all of a sudden you hear zombies breathing down the back of your neck. Definitely motivating. But what I like about this app in particular is that, unlike other gamified examples which we'll look at, which use things like badges, points, and leaderboards, this one uses narrative or story as its main player motivation. And it's been quite successful. So, you know, there's been roughly 4 million downloads, over 29 million kilometers run, and 3.7 million zombie chases. And that's as of 2017, those stats that I could find. So it's probably increased since then as well. If we move to the productivity area, so if you have children or housemates that you're working with, then Chore Wars is a great example of trying to make housework more engaging and fun. And so what this one does, it's a great example where essentially you add the tasks that you need to complete into this system. You create a character, you become an adventurer, and then you have to complete those tasks in order to earn XP, to fight monsters, to get treasure, and then you can use those for rewards. So it's a great way of adding this kind of game-like, or this role-playing game-like scaffolding around something that might be tedious for a number of people, and that is doing chores like vacuuming or cleaning. So a great one if you've got kids. If we look in the education space, so we talked about fitness, we talked about productivity. Education is another huge area for gamification. And one of my favorite examples, again, very popular example, which you may have come across and some of you may have actually used, is called Duolingo. So this is one of my favorite apps. It makes learning a language engaging by giving you themed challenges that you can choose from and interesting exercises. You get experience points every time you practice, and you can compare your points with your friends. But what I really like is the game-like interface that they've created, which makes it more engaging to learn a language and to learn it just in bite-sized chunks. So it's quite quick. Each lesson takes, less than a minute in order to undertake. But what I like also about Duolingo is they continue to change and evolve the gamification design. So one of the important things when it comes to gamification design is not just to build it and then leave it at that. The idea is to iterate and to see what works, what doesn't work, to add things, to remove things. And it's a constant evolving process of design. And this is really important as well, because you want to take the feedback from the people who are using your design or playing your gamified experience, and then you want to tweak it and keep improving it over time. And that's something that leads to the success of many popular video games as well. So if we look back at that example of World of Warcraft that I talked about earlier, that is a game that is constantly evolving. They're bringing out new expansions, they're changing it in order to keep it fresh. So, one of the keys to success when it comes to essentially designing anything is making sure that we're taking feedback and then constantly improving on it as well. And Duolingo has been very effective. So there are roughly 120 million users. Over 19 distinct languages as well. And what's interesting is they keep adding new languages too. So, you can learn things like English, Danish, and German, but now I've also seen that you can learn Klingon. So for any Star Trek fans out there, you can jump in and learn some of your favorite languages from different TV series as well. One of the other ones I want to mention from the education space is Kahoot. So if you are a teacher at university or primary school or high school, or even this works quite well internally in businesses, if you're trying to teach employees new processes or to make fire safety training more engaging, for example, then you can look at using an existing platform like Kahoot. Kahoot is basically creating gamified quizzes where everyone gets involved. As long as you have some kind of device like a computer or a smartphone, then you can play. And questions are shown, and there's a competition to see who can answer the questions quickly. This one is great. I use this all the time in university in order to make sure that we solidify the learning concepts and that people and students are listening as well when I'm teaching. Another great example is in the productivity space, and this one's called Forest. And Forest is a really nice app. It's quite simple. So in this day and age, it's very easy to get distracted by screens and mobile devices and apps and social networks. And so what Forest does is essentially they've gamified trying not to get distracted by apps and your phones. And so how this works is essentially you plant a tree and you choose an amount of time that you'd like to focus for. So for example, 25 minutes, and then you have to put your phone down and you can't touch it. If you touch your phone, if you lift it up, or if you change apps, then your plant dies. And so you need to not touch your phone or not change apps in order for that plant then to grow into a tree. And then once you've completed that time, that tree gets added to your forest and you can see your forest grow over time. I love this one. It's a great example. And again, very popular with the university students that I teach in order to help them be productive and focus on the work that they need to do. And again, very popular, 2 million plus paying users and 800,000 trees planted in real life. So they actually then take some of the proceeds of the app and then use it in order to plant trees in real life, which is quite nice. So those are some examples of really fully fledged gamification experiences where gamification is a big draw card for the actual app or product itself. What's interesting though is that you don't have to create a full-fledged gamification experience like that. You can create a light touch gamification experience as well. So if you've got an existing product or if you've got existing experiences and activities, you can just add smaller gamified elements in order to promote specific behaviors within those products as well. So examples are, I've got one here. It's a leaderboard. So when you sign up, it encourages you to invite more friends to this website by moving you up a leaderboard, and you get points for every other friend that you invite. So for this one, they're trying to promote, growth. And to do that, they're giving you points in order to encourage your friends as well. And you move up the top of the invite queue. So you'll be earlier to be invited to use this particular product or service. And this is one that I'm seeing quite often now as well, is where in exchange for your email address, you can do something like winning a discount. So you enter your email address, press the button, try your luck, the wheel spins, and then you get some kind of discount for the website. We're also seeing just small elements like cute little characters embedded into sign-up forms in order to provide feedback as well. And even little Easter eggs. So if you've used Slack before, we can see things like this surprise me button, which is down the bottom of this one here. Including little different Easter eggs and little different gamified elements as well can make for a more fun, motivating, and engaging experience. On top of that, I've talked mostly about digital examples of gamification, but there are a lot of examples of analog gamification out there as well. So non-digital examples of gamification. And some of this we've used when we prototype gamification design, is we'll create a board game version first, or we'll create a non-digital version. And so, for example, one of the great examples I've had is just creating a card game in order to promote internal employee processes, in order to teach people or to onboard employees as well. So you can just create paper-based versions of games in order to teach people or to engage people as well. And this can be quite effective because these paper-based versions are much quicker and much cheaper to develop and can be just as effective in some cases. Okay, great. That's a lot of examples of gamification, but I just wanted to show you the wide range of different areas in which gamification is being applied to. So as you could see, there were fitness areas, education, productivity, learning, health. There's so many different areas in which gamification can be applied, because essentially it comes down to we're looking at behavior change. And so wherever we need to promote behavior change and there's an issue with motivation, then we can look at applying gamification design. So let's say you have a product or some kind of experience, whether you're teaching in the classroom, and you want to change someone's behavior. You want to promote some kind of learning or promote some kind of behavior or activity. How do we get started as a gamification designer? And the good news is you probably already have started designing gamification already, even if you don't realize it. So what's interesting is for most of our lives, we have been creating our own little games to motivate ourselves. My mum actually is a gamification designer. When we're in the car and fighting as young kids, my mum invented a game called The Quiet Game. And the quiet game was who could be the quietest for the longest. And whoever was the quietest for the longest won the game. So as you can see, my mum is already a gamification designer. And what's interesting is we might have already created games as created our own games in order to keep ourselves from getting bored or to try and motivate us to do something, whether it's work, if we try to do something as fast as possible. And so we are already, or most likely many of you have already been creating little games in order to motivate yourself. So, things like I'll race you to this place, or can you guess, or the first one to, or I spy with my little eye, or do this chore and then you get this. There are these little games that we have already been creating for a while. So, a quick little activity. I want you to take a moment and have a think about some games that you have created yourself, whether it's to motivate yourself or to motivate someone else, maybe in your family. If you have children as well, you may have created little games in order to motivate them to do something. And I'd love for you to share them in the chat, these little games that you may have created. So for me, I invented a little game just to keep myself from getting bored while in the car. I would imagine there was a little man running along beside me and he'd have to jump over all of the roads in order to get to the goal as well. So little things like that, which may have stopped you from becoming bored, that you may have created little games. So have a think about it, and I'd love for you to share some of them in the chat box if there's games that you've created. Maybe a game to get up early, or to go to sleep on time, to go do some exercise. Have a think about little games that you might have created and share them in there, and I'll have a look at them in a little bit. So these little games that we create ourselves, they are a good start, but the problem is some of these games often aren't very good. So for example, that game that I talked about that my mum created, the quiet game, so who could be the quietest for the longest, it got old very quickly. So as soon as one person made a noise, we realized that it wasn't a very fun game, and we realized that mum was just trying to trick us into being quiet that entire game. So this became quite old quite quickly, and it wasn't really that fun as well for us as children. And this is a really important point to talk about, is that not all video games or games in general are fun. For every good game out there, there are many, many terrible games as well. Games that aren't that interesting, get old quite quickly, or just don't really capture our attention. And so it can be quite difficult as well to come up with a good game. And this is the same for gamification as well, is that, excuse me for I had my cat scratching at the door, and I know that would get quite distracting quite quickly. He likes attention. So this is the same for gamification as well, is that not all gamification is well-designed gamification. And there's been a little bit of a trend over the past 5 to 10 years where we've seen very similar gamification being used for many different use cases. And we've started to call this the Gamification Blueprint. And the idea is that it will involve usually applying one of these three things: points, badges, or leaderboards in order to motivate someone to do something. Now, these can be quite useful, and they can be good ways in which to motivate people, but there are some things missing when we just use these elements alone. So I want to share with you one of my favorite examples that demonstrates how these elements can be not that engaging. So this is a fantastic website called Progress Wars. It's quite simple. You get a mission, which you need to complete. As you can see, the mission here is to annoy soybeans, and we get a progress bar and a button that we need to press in order to perform the mission. So if we were just looking at points, badges, and leaderboards and these feedback and reward elements, then this here would be the most engaging game in the world. So let's have a look. I'm going to click the button perform mission, and the progress bar starts to increase. I keep clicking the button. The progress bar increases until it gets to be completely full, and then bam, we complete the mission and we get a new mission, which is to rob the Ninja Queen. Okay, what do you think? Is it a very fun game? Have a think about it. What do you think is missing from this particular game? So just in your mind, have a quick think. It's like, okay, we've seen this. This is a gamified experience. We've got points, we've got levels, we've got different visual aspects which make it look like a game. but it's not the most fun. There's something missing. So the issue is that there's no challenge at all. You know, it's just a matter of pressing the button and that's it. So even though we're getting reward elements and things like that, the game itself isn't that engaging because there's no real challenge to it, which is a really important part of video game design. So we've got points, badges, and leaderboards, but the problem with these aspects is that they are predominantly feedback and reward-based elements. So yes, they are good to include in the gamification designs that we create, but at the same time, we've got to make sure to create a complete gamified experience, which takes into account all the important aspects of games and game design. So when we just use those elements alone, we're missing key elements that make games fun and engaging. So what exactly is missing? What makes a game fun and engaging? Well, there's a couple of interesting things that we need when it comes to game design. At its core, video games generally have four things. They have a goal that you're working towards. They have rules in order to tell you how to reach that goal. And then they have some kind of feedback in order to tell you how close you are to achieving your goal. And then it's the combination of goals and rules that create challenge and create interesting experience for us. Now, there's two really interesting theories in the research which explain why video games are so motivating and so enjoyable. These two theories I want to share with you quickly now. The first one is self-determination theory. So this is a theory that was proposed by two researchers, DC and Ryan. And the idea behind self-determination theory is that it is a theory of motivation, which suggests that us as people, we tend to be driven by a need to grow and to gain fulfillment. And it proposes that there are three psychological needs that, if satisfied, allow for optimal function and growth as human beings. And these three psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And so what exactly these are is autonomy is a sense of choice over one's actions. So the idea that we have free will and that we can choose what we want to choose. So having that sense of choice is really important as opposed to being told what to do or being controlled. So that's something that's really important to us to feel fulfilled. The second thing is competence. So that is the ability to be optimally challenged. We don't like things which are too boring, and we don't like things which are too difficult. We like something which matches our skill level and challenges us as well. And the third thing that's really important to us as human beings is a sense of relatedness. And that is development and maintenance of close personal relationships. And so that is support from our peers, our family, our friends, and feeling like we have close relationships with other people as well. So supporting these three things is argued to foster a very, very high quality form of motivation and engagement for activities. So by supporting these three things, we can make people feel fulfilled and motivated as well in anything that we're designing. So if we have a look at some particular activities that support these three things quite well, we can see something like Wikipedia, for example. Wikipedia is a great example of something that supports self-determination theory, or these elements or three basic psychological needs of self-determination theory quite well. There's autonomy, there's competence, and there's relatedness. So autonomy in the sense that if I was to edit Wikipedia, so Wikipedia is amazing. It's something which is completely created by volunteers, people volunteering and editing and adding information to it. So people aren't paid to add to Wikipedia. It's something that they're doing or choosing to do in their own time because they find it motivating. And we can see when we look at Wikipedia, it supports these three basic psychological needs quite well. There's autonomy, so I can choose an article or any article that I'd like to contribute to. There's competence, where I need a certain level of skill in order to be able to contribute to these articles. I need some knowledge around a particular area, and that knowledge needs to be accurate. And then there's a sense of relatedness, where we're all working together to create this entire encyclopedia together. And it's amazing that Wikipedia has become one of the most, or if not the most popular encyclopedias out there, even though people aren't paid to create it. And the other area as well, or other examples that support self-determination theory and these three basic psychological needs quite well are, of course, video games. And this might be one of the reasons why World of Warcraft is so popular and so engaging, is that it supports these three elements of autonomy, competence, and relatedness quite well. So it's got autonomy in the sense that you can go out, you can choose your character, you can choose what quests you want to do, you can choose where you want to go and what you want to do in the game. It's got competence in terms of the balance of challenge and skill. So, you level up and you become stronger and more powerful, but then you get also more difficult quests that you need to complete as well. So it balances that challenge with skill quite well. And then finally, and probably mostly the most important reason why World of Warcraft is so engaging is because it supports relationships and social aspects quite well within the game. So within the game, you can create a guild of people. You can go out and work with people in order to achieve quests and to undertake missions together. And so you get that really those shared experience with everyone else around you. It can be one of the most engaging things about this game. So it supports those aspects quite well. So self-determination theory, a really interesting theory in terms of research to look at in terms of explaining why video games are incredibly engaging. And then the other theory as well as to why video games are engaging is the theory of flow. So flow is a really interesting concept. The idea is that flow describes a state of full immersion. It's when you're concentrating so intently on an activity that you're said to be in a state of flow. And flow has been witnessed in people who rock climb, who dance, who play chess, and those who play video games as well. So if you can ever think of a time in which you were maybe reading a book or playing a game or watching a movie and it felt like time flew by incredibly quickly, but you felt so engaged with the activity that you are undertaking, then you are most likely or would have been in a state of flow. It's when time feels like it passes very quickly. So when you're in a state of flow, you often experience many things such as an intense and focused concentration on the activity, a sense of great control over the activity you're undertaking, and often a distortion of time occurs. So, when people sit down, play a game, and it feels like only 5 minutes have passed, but actually 4 hours have passed and they didn't realize it, then they're most likely in a state of flow. Now, in order to reach or encourage this state of flow, you generally need to have the following. You need a clear goal that you're working towards. You need clear progress towards completing that goal. You need clear and immediate feedback to tell you how you're going. And you need a balance of challenge and skill as well. And as you can see, this is something that many video games have. They often have a clear goal. They have clear progress. So they tell you how you're going and towards completing your goal. They have clear feedback. And they have this balance of challenge and skill. So they present with you a challenge, which is usually suited to your skill level. So to promote flow, you need this challenge, needs to be provided that is appropriate for the skill level of a person. If a challenge is too hard, then the person may feel anxious or overwhelmed, while if a challenge is too easy, it can be quite boring to that person. And so it has close ties to the previous theory that I was talking about of self-determination theory when we talk about competence. That is the ability to optimally be challenged. And so this is something that can be applied as well to other aspects of your life. So if you're given a work task which is too difficult, you may experience anxiety. And if you're giving a work task which is too easy, you may experience boredom as well. So this idea of making sure you give someone a task or you find a task that is suited for your skill level is really important to stay engaged. So I would like, again, for you, I like having interactive parts to these workshops rather than me just talking all the time and you just listening, but I want you to take a moment and write down or share again in the chat any activities that you have undertaken where you think you've entered a state of flow. So I want you to have a think about, have there been activities, maybe, it could be video games, for example. It could be dancing. It could be something else where you've experienced time going faster than it actually was, or you've been so concentrated on the activity, or you felt like you've been in control of the activity that you've undertaken as well. So have a think about it and note down, and maybe share with me as well in the comments any activities where you might have experienced a state of flow. I'm going to have a look at the chat. I haven't had a look at the chat yet. So, yeah. Aliana's saying dance, music, games, movies. Yes. Yeah, all good examples. That's great. So sports. Yeah, sports is a very good one. So, being engaged in the sports that you're playing, it can be very engaging and it can feel like time can pass very quickly. Unless you're losing, of course, and then it feels like it's going incredibly slow. Okay, let's move on to the third part, which is the gamer motivation model. So this is a really interesting one. This is another important factor to consider. is that although we have very general theories that explain why games can be engaging, what's interesting is many of us find different games engaging for different reasons. So some of us might like, for example, chess, the intellectual aspect and the competitive element of chess, whereas some people might like not competing at all and might like playing single player games where we're exploring dungeons and undertaking puzzles and challenges as well. And so this is really interesting, is that there are different games that people like. Now, there's been some really excellent research by researchers including Nick Yee into what motivates us when it comes to video games. And so these researchers collected motivation data from over 400,000 gamers, and they used this to establish psychometric techniques, or using established psychometric techniques such as factor analysis, determined this gamer motivation model. And so essentially what they found was that there are 6 key pairs of motivation. So when it comes to what people like in video games, there are a range of different things. They found that there are these 6 key pairs of motivations that help to explain what we like in video games. So we've got the action pair, where some people like the action elements of video games, such as when things are destroyed, guns, explosives, chaos, mayhem, or the excitement of video games. So fast-paced action, surprises, and thrills. We've got the social pair of motivations. So that is people who like competing against others, or people who like the community aspects of games. We have the mastery motivations as well. So that's where people who like a challenge or who like strategy aspects. We have the achievement pair of motivations, where people like completing things such as getting all the collectibles, completing all the missions, or creating a powerful character, or getting powerful equipment. We have the immersion motivation, where people like being immersed in a fantasy world, being someone else, or being somewhere else, or people who really like the narrative or the story of games. And then we also have the creativity motivations, where people like designing things in games. They like expressing or customizing the games, or discovering, exploring, tinkering, and experimenting as well. So what's interesting is that when we play games, we have different things that we like in games, and we may be motivated by different things as well. So have a quick look at these 6 key pairs of motivations and have a think about what are the things that draw you to sports or to games that you like in particular. Is it things like, do you like the fantasy elements? Do you like the story elements? Is it the competitive elements you like? Well, maybe it's the excitement, and some people just like blowing up things. So it might be that thing which draws you to video games as well. Now, the nice thing about this particular research is you can jump on the website and you can complete your own gamer motivation profile based off a number of questions that they have there, in order to see what kind of motivations you have or that you like when it comes to playing games as well. So you can see for me, I'm very much an action and social orientated gamer. And they will then show you the different pairs of motivations and what you like. So apparently for me, I like excitement and destruction, as well as the competition and community aspects of games. Not so much the completion. I'm not really interested in achieving everything in a game, or making sure I unlock everything. So this is a really nice tool in which to use in order to uncover information about the potential people who are going to be playing your gamified experience, and to see what kind of things they're motivated by as well. So you can use this particular research or use this questionnaire in order to help you uncover what kind of games or gamification experiences you might want to be designing for, or to design and include. Okay, great. So that one's a good one. I encourage you to check out the website, do a search for Gamer Motivation Profile, and have a look at what you are motivated by when it comes to video games. Okay, so we have now looked at examples of gamification. We have now looked at what makes video games so motivating, so the underlying theories. We are now ready to actually design some gamification. So to help you design gamification, essentially I've got a gamification design method, which is one approach to designing gamification, which you can use. It has 5 steps involved with it. The first step is to identify the problem and the goals and the behaviors that you want to change. The second step is validating and making sure that these are motivation problems and that they can't be fixed by anything else, and that gamification is actually the best solution, because it can be easy to jump to the conclusion that you need to use gamification when in actual fact there might be another simpler, easy approach to take. Then we jump into the designing of the gamification. So we design different elements that we'd like to include in our experience. We then create the gamified experience, and then we measure and play test the gamified experience, and then we loop back and improve it. So then we take our learnings from measuring and playtesting, we design it, we redesign it, add elements, remove elements, create a new prototype, and test it until we get to an experience that we're quite happy with in order to then share with our audience and get it out there in the real world. So you'll notice that this is probably very similar to many other iterative design methodologies, or maybe you've come across this when designing software or designing tools or learning activities, is you probably will take a very similar approach. This is nothing new, but it's just, it's important to note that you don't jump straight into gamification design. That's important to understand the problem fully that you're trying to change the behavior for first. So with that in mind, step one is identifying a goal for your gamification design. As I mentioned before, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that you need gamification, and especially when everyone else is using gamification or is trying gamification, and gamification is such a buzzword and a novelty that it sounds really fun. You think, yes, I should be using gamification, but in actual fact, maybe you want to start somewhere else first. So the problem is we've seen gamification as being a little bit of a silver bullet, and it's made a bit of a bad name for itself in terms of being used as a default way to try and motivate and engage people. But don't forget, there are many different other ways in which to motivate people, and gamification is just another tool that you can use as a designer in order to create something that's more motivating. So the important thing with gamification is that it should always start with a goal for behavior change. And this might be a very big fuzzy goal as well. I like to call it a fuzzy goal, but essentially it's you might find people starting with a very large, broad goal. And once you take this broad goal, identify this broad goal, you then break it down into the specific components and the behaviors that you want to motivate. So I want you to have a think about it. With the work that you do, whether it's teaching, whether it's in the business space, you want to think about what your big overall goal is that is related to a behavior change issue that you're dealing with. So some big goals that I've listed off here are: we want to promote people to feel healthy. We may want to engage our students to learn better. We may want to provide a great customer experience, or we may want to put on an excellent conference for people. It's really nice to start with this big fuzzy goal. So have a think about, what is the big fuzzy goal that you want to focus on for a gamification design? If we think about the behavior that you're trying to motivate or that you're trying to change, what is the big overarching goal of this particular behavior that you're trying to promote? So what do you tie it back? This might be your vision or your values, or the big goal that you're trying to help, I guess, when it comes to your gamification design. So for me, when I teach students, the big fuzzy goal for me is to engage my students and to make sure that they're feeling engaged, and that they're actually learning the material as well. So from here on in, I would like you to grab a piece of paper and pen and to start writing down some of these things and to start thinking about it, because we'll walk through this idea or this activity of identifying the behaviors and the goals that you want to focus on for your gamification design. So we start with our big goal, which is the reason for why we're doing gamification design, or why we're looking to change people's behavior. And then the idea is that you take your big goal, you break it down into very specific goals, and then you work out what are the specific behaviors that we want to encourage people to undertake in order for them to reach that specific goal and to promote that big fuzzy goal or that big value that we're leading towards. And then we need very specific ways in which to measure that particular behavior to make sure that that behavior is complete and that it's working towards our particular goal for behavior change. And then that's when we can start to gamify. So the idea is we start with a very big goal, we break it down into very specific goals, we identify the behaviors for that goal, we work out the way to measure success, and then once we have those measures for success, we can then gamify it. Now, I'll walk you through this because it can get a little bit confusing. But if I start with my area of promoting learning, so my big fuzzy goal could be that I want to promote learning and I want to promote engagement. Then one really important aspect of promoting good learning and promoting engagement is that I want some of my students to retain the knowledge that I teach them. So like today, I'm teaching you about gamification. I hope that you retain some of the knowledge, whether it's around some of the theories of why video games are so engaging, or some of the examples of good gamification in the past. I want you to be able to retain that knowledge and to recall it so you can help use it in your work processes in the future as well. So if we're talking about promoting learning, then knowledge retention could be just one of the areas that I want to promote. And if I talk about that, knowledge retention, then if I break it down to a specific behavior, I want my students to be able to recall very quickly and accurately the information that I share with them. So, if we're talking about the theory of flow, I want you to go away after this and be able to talk about, oh yes, it needs that balance of challenge and skill in order to be able to motivate people or to enter that state of flow. And that if the challenge is too difficult, it becomes, you can become quite anxious. And if the challenge is too easy, it becomes quite boring. So I want you to be able to recall that information accurately and quickly as well, so you can use it in the future. And then I might identify very specific measures. So what does quick recall and what does accuracy look like? Well, I could define it as, I want you to be able to recall the knowledge in less than 20 seconds. And I don't want you to have to be able to look it up on the internet. I want you to be able to recall it from your brain. And I want you to be 100% accurate. So I demand perfection, of course. And so, making sure that you are accurately explaining the information that was taught to you. So all of a sudden now we've gone from a very big fuzzy goal where we want to promote learning. And this could be other things as well, such as encouraging your employees to work more successfully, or it could be to encourage people to download and engage with your product or your service or your app. But we have this very big goal, and we break it down to the very specific measures that we want to promote in terms of behavior change. So we want people to recall information accurately within 20 seconds and 100% accuracy. So now, once we've identified the very specific measures, we can then identify a way in which to gamify it. So for me, a competitive quiz might work, because a competitive quiz not only gets you to answer as quickly as possible, but it also promotes accuracy as well in terms of the knowledge. And so we might use something like Kahoot in order to gamify and to make knowledge, recall, and accuracy more engaging. So we've got our big fuzzy goal. The next step is to understand what it is that contributes to the success of your big goal. I've got two examples here. So the first example is, if our big goal is to help people feel more healthy, then, we might want to encourage people to eat well, maybe to get enough exercise and to get enough sleep as well, and to regularly exercise. So that could be some of the bigger goals or the smaller goals when we're thinking about the big goal of feeling healthy. If we're talking about a great customer experience, then, some aspects or some important contributors to that could be that if we want to promote a great customer experience, we want our employees to be able to respond quickly to customer inquiries. We want them to be friendly in the way that they talk to customers. And we want to make sure that our employees are able to solve our customers' problems as well. And so, as you can see, we're starting to pull apart what exactly does a great customer experience mean. And so on your piece of paper and with your pen, you might have your big fuzzy goal, and you might start to draw elements out and say, okay, quick response contributes to this goal, being friendly contributes to this goal, solving the problem contributes to this goal. So at this point in time, I want you now to write down some of the smaller things or smaller goals that help contribute to the success of this big goal. So like I mentioned, if it's great customer experience, what does it mean for your employees to provide a great customer experience? Or if it's engaging learners, what does it mean for a learner to be engaged? Or what does it mean for a learner to accurately understand the information as well? And so what we're doing is we're taking this very large concept and we're breaking it down into smaller components. So that's the next step of identifying your behaviors. Once you've done that, what's next is to identify the skills and behaviors that are required to achieve these particular goals. So let's go back to my example before of feeling healthy. If I want to focus, I've got the big goal of feeling healthy, and I've identified that eating well, getting enough sleep, and regular exercise contributes to this. I might focus on getting enough sleep. So I'm going to break down what this means exactly a little bit further. So I'm going to focus on getting enough sleep, and what are some of the more specific things that I need to do to achieve this. So if we talk about getting enough sleep, what are the things that we need to do in order to get enough sleep? We need to potentially head to bed early. So we need to make sure that we're heading to bed early and not getting to bed too late. We need to make sure that we sleep for enough amount of time that suits our body. And we need to make sure that we have a consistent schedule. So we're going to bed at the same time every night. So this is where some research might come into play. So obviously I've gone away and researched what it means to get enough sleep. And I've identified that these are three important things that contribute to getting enough sleep. if we talk about great customer experience, so if I want to focus in particularly on quick responses, so we've identified that a quick response, being friendly and solving their problem, all contributes to a great customer experience. If I want to drill down and focus on quick response, then I might find that what leads to success in terms of a quick response is making sure that our employees have a good recall speed, that they have knowledge accuracy, and that they're able to locate any information that they don't know off the top of their head very quickly, maybe on the company wiki or on the company help desk as well, or the intranet. And so we're starting to identify more specifically what contributes to the success of these larger goals. So the next step, you've got your big fuzzy goal, you've got the smaller goals that contribute to that, and now we're looking at very specific skills and behaviors that are required to help or required to complete these smaller goals. So we're getting there. Now we're getting down into more interesting territory. So we're not just helping a large goal, we're actually getting into more of the specific behaviors that we need to focus on. Okay, the final step is now, what are the important measures for these skills and behaviors? So we're looking now at the specific measures of success. So we've talked about, getting enough sleep, for example, but how do we know that these goals have actually been achieved? So this is where we identify the very specific behaviors that lead to our goal and the behaviors that we want to promote. So we can see which of these behaviors are being performed and which are not. So if we're talking about getting enough sleep, in terms of identifying a way in which we can measure that, we need to look at identifying a very specific behavior. So for me, for getting enough sleep could be heading to bed at a very specific time, 9:30 p.m. It could be sleeping for a specific amount of hours, so 8 hours. And it could be making sure that we have the consistent schedule from Monday to Sunday, where we go to bed every night at 9:30 and sleep for 8 hours. So as you can see now, we've got very measurable behaviors. We can actually measure, am I going to bed at 9:30 and am I sleeping for 8 hours? When it comes to quick response, if we're talking about customer experience, then we can set some very specific measures as well that show what success or what the KPIs look like. So it could be a recall speed of less than 3 seconds. It could be a knowledge accuracy of 90%, and it could be locating the information on the company wiki in less than 1 minute. So what we're doing now is we've turned this big fuzzy goal into very specific behaviors and very specific measures and goals that we want people to be able to achieve. And so if they are able to achieve this, the recall speed of less than 3 seconds, the knowledge accuracy of 90%, and the location of the information less than a minute, then we know we've achieved the goal and the behavior change that we're looking for. So the next step is then to write down the ways we can measure success for the skills and the behaviors identified. Okay, that's a lot. I know that is, we're jumping into all this stuff before actually gamifying it, but this is super important because you need to really identify or understand what exactly it is, the behavior that you're trying to change, and what success looks like when it comes to completing these behaviors. So what it means for people to be successful when they're completing these particular behaviors that we're trying to promote. So once we've identified it, that creates a really solid foundation for now looking at these behaviors and understanding, okay, if people aren't completing these behaviors or they're not reaching these goals, then what are the reasons for it? Is it because it's boring? Is it because they don't have the ability or the skill to be able to do it? Or are they not being prompted to do it as well? So we need to validate, is the next step, the reason why these particular goals aren't being reached. So we've identified our goals and behaviors. We need to actually validate them. And the reason for this is we need to make sure that gamification is actually a suitable approach. Gamification can work really well in some contexts, mostly in areas where motivation is an issue, but there might be other areas where gamification might actually not be the best approach because there's something easier that we can actually do in order to help promote behavior change and motivation. So the first question you need to ask is, why hasn't this change happened already? Why isn't the reason people aren't reaching these particular goals or undertaking these behaviors? And again, if we go back to this FOG behavior model, there could be a number of reasons. Maybe people's motivation is incredibly low, but maybe as well, it's really hard to do the particular behavior. So for example, maybe our company wiki is very difficult to navigate. People are struggling to find the information because the search tool isn't that good. And so in actual fact, we might need to improve or spend time or money improving the search tool or the search bar of the company wiki rather than applying gamification, because we could apply gamification, but it's not going to make accessing the wiki or the company intranet easier. And so this is something that's really important to consider, is to look at, okay, is it a motivation issue, or are there other things at play as well? Is it easy to actually undertake the behavior? How, what is stopping people from going to bed at 9:30 p.m.? Is it a motivation thing? Is it an ability thing? Or are we just forgetting to do it as well? Is there no prompt there to tell us that we need to go to bed at that time? So how do we know if we have problems with a motivation, an ability, or a lack of prompt? So what we need to do now is we need to actually go out. We've formed a hypothesis that people aren't undertaking these goals for various reasons, and we need to actually work out why people aren't actually achieving their goals and undertaking their behaviors. So we need to go out and we need to ask people. So there are a number of useful research approaches for asking either your employees or your customers or your students as to why they aren't achieving their particular goals. You can run interviews, you can run focus groups where you're talking to multiple people at once. You can observe people's behavior, see what they're doing in a particular environment, see if a lot of people have the same problem as well. You can also talk to experts in the area or do some research around, why people aren't getting to bed on time or why students aren't recalling information. And you can also do things as well as distributing surveys, collecting data. Have a think about some things that you've done in the past, maybe in your work. You might be running student experience surveys, or you might be running employee experience surveys in order to understand the people that you're working with. Have a think about some things that you've done in the past, or what you could do as well in terms of engaging the people that you're designing an experience for. The other thing to consider is that good measures are important. So understanding or making use of existing surveys and tools out there are really important. And it's also important to collect as much data as possible from different types of data collection techniques. So you could do interviews, you could do focus groups, you could do surveys, and then bring all that information together to help understand the reason why people aren't completing your behavior change goal. Also, collecting demographic data can help create personas, and getting people to undertake things like the player motivation survey can be a useful way to understand more about the people that you're designing your experience for. Now, when you do this particular research, there's a couple of things you're looking for. If it's going to be an issue with ability, so if people are finding things hard to do, you're looking for people who are saying things like, this was too hard to do, I'm not good enough to perform this or to undertake this behavior, or I just don't understand it. Maybe there's a mental block as to why they can't achieve this. And so if you hear phrases and things like that, then generally it's going to be potentially a problem with ability. And so you may need to focus on making it easier for people to actually do the behavior or to complete the goal. If there's a lack of prompt, so people aren't being reminded to do the behavior change or to do the activity, then you may hear things like, it's the last thing on my mind, I remember to do it, or too late to do it, or I keep forgetting to do it as well. So people are talking about maybe forgetting to do the behavior because they just can't remember. And so what we're missing is a prompt in order to remind people to perform a behavior. And then if it's an issue with motivation, what you're looking for is things around people saying that they're not interested, that they can't see the value, that it's boring. And so if we see statements like this may generally indicate that it's a problem with motivation. And so this is what we're looking for when it comes to gamification, is that if people are saying, look, they're a little bit bored, it's not really interesting, I'm not finding it engaging, then this is where we can identify a space for gamification to potentially be used to help motivate people further. So I want you to have a think about your goal and your behaviors that you've identified, and have a think about why it hasn't been reached yet. Is it a motivation problem, or is it a problem to do with ability or lack of prompt? If it is a motivation problem, then great, we can move on and look at ways in which we can use gamification to then improve the experience. Okay, we're up to the fun part, and this is actually designing gamification now. I know it felt like a long approach to get to this particular point, but it's super important to understand what are the goals and what are the behaviors that you're trying to promote, and the reasons why people aren't achieving those goals or undertaking those behaviors. So we're at now the point where we can actually design some gamification. We've identified the behaviors that we want to promote, and we've realized that yes, motivation is a particular issue with it. So what we want to do now is we want to basically, on your piece of paper, a good approach is to look at the current state of the behavior or the goal and see what people are currently doing. So, how long are people taking to recall information? How accurately are students getting our questions correct? Then we want to look at the future state, so the goal state. What do we want to achieve in the future? So we have our current state, we have our future state, and then in the middle is where we'll start to think about ways in which we can gamify it or add aspects in order to help us reach that future state from our current state. Okay, let's gamify. So where do we start? For now, I want to introduce you to 3 simple approaches. We've only got a little bit more time, so it does take a while to dive into what does effective gamification design looks like. But essentially, I want to introduce you to 3 simple approaches to getting started with gamification design. The first is simply adding rules to make it a little bit more challenging. The second one is being inspired by player motivations. And the third one is to look at what others have done in the gamification design space and potentially borrowing and using some of those elements yourself. So let's start with the first one. Once we've identified the behaviors or the goals that we want to achieve, we can add rules to make this particular behavior more interesting and challenging. So remember when we were talking about games, one of the big things that makes games engaging is that we have a goal that we're working towards, but then what we do is we add rules to make that goal interesting or more challenging to reach. I'll give you an example of this. Golf is a great example of where we add rules in order to make the particular goal more interesting or more challenging. Now, I think everyone's probably heard of golf before. Some of you may have played it as well. But golf is a really good example. If we look at golf, the goal of the game is quite simple. You have to get the ball into the hole. But we can't just pick up the ball and just go walk over and put it in the hole. We've added a number of rules to make the game itself more interesting. So for example, with golf, we have to start hundreds of meters away. We have to use a stick that we have to hit the ball with. And then we've added things like putting sand pits and water in the way to make it more difficult. So it's really interesting. We have this simple goal of taking a ball and putting it in a hole, but we've added all these rules to make it more challenging and more complex. And we seem to find that's much more engaging and it makes it a much more engaging and challenging experience. So we can do exactly the same as well with our particular behavior goal. So for example, if people are finding it boring, then we can add rules to make the behavior or the challenge or the goal more challenging and interesting. So, for example, we could add a time limit. So all of a sudden we say, okay, you've got 60 seconds to be able to recall as much information as possible. Go. Or you could give people a time limit in order to submit their timesheets by every week at your workplace. So you can add these rules in order to make the goal itself more interesting. You could have a competitive rule where you have to be the first to be able to do something, so it becomes a race. You could get people to make a prediction or to guess the outcome of something as well. So, guess how many people might get this question right, or guess how many people we might try and help with our customer experience. We could add physical limitations. We could add the ability to find or to hunt for something, make something random, pretend to be someone else. There's all these interesting rules in which we can add in order to make or in order to increase the challenge of the particular behavior that we have there. So that is one quick way to get started with gamification. This works quite well in terms of, especially if you're in the learning space, if you want to make an activity more interesting, you can just add rules in order to make it more challenging and present it as game-like to people as well. Now, the second approach to designing gamification is to have a look and use the gamer motivation model here. So have a look at what kind of players you have. So maybe get them to do the motivation model survey. And, for example, if they like story aspects, then you could look at using a story in order to make the behavior more engaging. Or if they like a challenge aspect, then you could look at adding some kind of challenge into it to make it quite difficult. If it's a competitive aspect that people like the most, then you could look at using this as a starting point in which to design a gamified experience as well. So yes, if you dive into the motivation model, what they do is they also provide information on people's preferences, and they give game examples that people in these particular motivations might like. So a great example is if we look at creativity immersion. So if we look at the aspect of design down the bottom, if we have people who like to be able to design, then we can create or reward people with customization options. So whenever they get a question right, maybe they get something which allows them to customize their workspace or their learning environment. They can create an avatar. There could be different ways in which we could use this information to help us design a gamified experience. The third option as well to get started with gamification quite quickly is to have a look at what else has worked well in the past and maybe adopt or use some of these elements. So, for example, we can look at very successful aspects of gamification design. So if we look at Duolingo, this is a great example of a successful gamification design. We can look at what makes Duolingo engaging and maybe try and adopt and use some of the elements from this. The same could be with using apps like the productivity or the forest app. Have a look at the rules that they've implemented, have a look at the goals, the rules, the rewards, and the feedback, and use some of these elements as well. You can also adopt existing platforms that are out there as well. So you can look at using existing gamified platforms or systems and maybe use those. There are plenty out there that people have created, and you can use these as a way to shortcut the amount of work that you need to do in order to get gamification into your workplace environment or into your classroom. So a great example is to jump on and look at, for example, Kahoot. So if you are trying to engage your learners, or if you're trying to engage your employees to learn something, then you could jump on and use a platform that already exists like Kahoot in order to quickly and easily add gamification to the behaviors that you're trying to promote. Now, just a word of warning is that if you do use an existing gamification platform, you've got to be careful that it actually is promoting the behavior that you want to change. So this is where it's important to go back and look at the behavior and the goals that you've identified as something that you want to focus on, and make sure that the platform you're choosing is actually helping to support and promote those behaviors. Because sometimes there can be a mismatch of what exactly the platform is trying to promote and what your behaviors are that you are trying to promote as well. And this also comes back to the Gamification Blueprint, is there are a lot of systems out there that simply just add points, badges, and leaderboards in order to the platform, or have a platform that provides these things. And these might not be what you want to promote because it might be missing a sense of challenge. Okay, so those are 3 easy ways to get started with gamification. You can now look at, for example, taking your goals and your behaviors that you've identified, and the easiest way to get started is simply to add some rules there as well. So that's where you can start then filling in this middle section, is if you've got this current state, you've got this future state, what are some ways in which you could add gamification in order to make this more motivating as an experience? There's a lot more to gamification design than we can cover in today's session in the masterclass, but at least this is a really good starting point for you to start thinking about gamification design and in ways in which you can start implementing it. Okay, so now that we've kind of come up with some different ideas or brainstormed some ideas for gamification, the next step is actually to create your gamified experience and start testing it with people. And so there are 2 more steps to the gamification design process. The first is creating a prototype that you can actually test, and then measuring the success of this prototype when it comes to play testing. So let's say you've come up with some rules, you've chosen your gamification design features, but how do you actually know whether the gamification design features that you've chosen are actually a good choice or not? Well, you could simply invest a lot of time and money and build the gamified prototype and release it. And traditionally, this was the way, if we look at classic software development in the past with the waterfall methodology, is where you'd simply build it and release it and hoped people liked it. However, this is a bit of a risky gamble just to build something and then release it into the world, because what happens if people don't like it, if it's failed, or if it doesn't actually succeed at achieving your particular goals? And so instead, it's very useful to adopt an iterative design methodology where you design your idea, you prototype it, you evaluate it, and then you take the results of that evaluation and redesign it, add new features, take away features, and keep doing this until you've reached something where you're happy to then release it to the world. And so this is a really important process of user-centered design, as well as to get input from people as early as possible in the design process, so you can make sure that you're on track in terms of designing something that is going to be effective and useful. And so for this, you might actually want to create a prototype to begin with. And so prototyping is very popular in many different areas. You do it when you're creating new products often, as well as creating games as well. And so we can learn a lot from the way in which games are prototyped to help us prototype gamified experiences. Essentially, prototyping is about answering questions quickly. It mitigates risks that we might have with the particular design that we're creating. And these questions the answers to these questions will help determine the success of your design. So you might have questions like, is the gamification design that you've created actually fun? Is it easy to learn how to play the gamification design, or is it easy to understand the rules? Is the leaderboard easy to understand? Maybe you've implemented a leaderboard element, or are the badges or other aspects of the game challenging enough? Now, there are a number of different ways in which you can get started, but one really quick and easy way to get started with a prototype is simply to create a paper prototype. And these are prototypes that are made with pen, paper, or other physical materials. For example, to test the gameplay of gamification design, you might create a simple board or card game. The nice thing about paper prototypes is they're super easy to make, change, and get feedback from quickly. And we use this a lot when creating gamification design. So they're great for testing gameplay ideas. We can create, for example, maybe we have an idea for a digital card-based collector game. We can actually create physical versions of that card game and use that to play along with calculators in order to implement or help us implement some of the rules. You can also do mock-ups of screens, and you can change different elements by swapping screens in and out and showing different aspects on the screen. And these are great for getting quick feedback as well. And, these prototypes may look nothing like the final gamification design. So, here's a great example from a local game design company here in Brisbane. It's an example of a prototype that they built and they found did not work at all. But what was nice is they could spend just a week of time or so building a prototype, getting feedback, and realizing that this particular game design was not going to work, and so they could scrap it and move on to something else. So you're not investing a lot of money, you're not investing a lot of time by building these paper prototypes. However, the paper prototypes aren't as close to the real thing if you're creating a digital prototype, so there are some disadvantages as well. But we've used paper prototypes effectively in the past, and even to create analog gamification. So, for example, we created a role-playing game where people would select different cards in order to role-play those people for a customer survey experience and employee onboarding solution. And this was a great way simply just to add game elements to make this process a little bit more engaging without having to build a digital version as well. And you can also do things like create physical trophies and present those to people as well. So paper prototypes are a great way to start. They're very simple, they're easy, but they can be difficult in terms of replicating the actual digital experience, and they may not be as realistic if you are creating digital gamification. So then you could move on, instead of creating a paper prototype, you could look at creating a digital prototype. Digital prototypes are great to make more realistic environments for players to test in, but they can take more time to create as well. So often in the gamification space or the video game space, we may use things like game engines or mock-up tools like Envision or Figma in order to create more realistic digital prototypes, which we then can present to people. You can actually use things like PowerPoint as well, or Keynote, in order to create mock-ups of the interface that you're designing. And these tools actually have a lot of really nice interactive elements. So you can add buttons, and when people click on certain areas in your Keynote or your PowerPoint file, they can take them to different other areas of it. So it can be a really easy way to get started with creating a digital prototype. And here's an example of a digital prototype that we created for a gamified step counter. So rather than build a fully fledged step counter, we instead created a digital prototype using Keynote, where people could click through and give us feedback on the gamification design. Again, there are some advantages to doing this. It's a more realistic experience, but obviously it can be hard to implement some of the game rules themselves. And so when it comes to wanting to try and try out what the actual game experience is like, the third option is to create a Wizard of Oz prototype. So many of you have probably heard of The Wizard of Oz, the story or the movie, and some of you may have seen it as well before. There was, in the film, there was an all-powerful Wizard of Oz, but in actual fact, it was just an ordinary man behind the scenes pulling the strings. So this is the same when it comes to Wizard of Oz prototyping. So what we mean by this is we create what looks like a realistic experience, but in actual fact, we're behind the scenes pretending to be the game and implementing the rules and making the changes. And so a great example of this is, here's a gamified learner logbook app that I built back in the day. And what we did for this was we actually created a fake leaderboard, and the leaderboard changed positions of fake people which moved around depending on how you were going or how the user was going. So we didn't have to build any network aspects. We just created a fake leaderboard in order to test that aspect out to see if people found it motivating. Another good example of another gamified experience that we created, which was a gamified step counter, was we essentially used a combination of Slack, Google Docs, and real-life step counters to create a fitness gamification design where people could challenge other players to place bets on who could complete the most steps each day. And for this, rather than create, again, a whole fully fledged game experience, what we did was, we had some of us pretend to be the game people would talk to us, and as the game, we would get back to them and try and implement the rules as well. So this is a really useful approach. So there are, again, some tips, advantages, and disadvantages for using this particular approach. It can take a lot of time, especially if you're pretending to be the game and implementing the rules. And so you need someone there all the time to kind of implement the rules and to provide feedback to the players. But again, it can be a great way to test the game experience without having to build an entire game itself. So that is the process of prototyping. You can use paper prototypes, digital prototypes, or Wizard of Oz prototypes in order to create an experience. And the important thing is basically to consider, with your current skills that you have, how quickly and how easily can you build a prototype that you can give to people to get feedback as quickly as possible. Okay, so the last step now is to measure. So you've come up with a gamification idea, you have built a prototype. It's now important to measure this with real people. So what we want to do is play test this particular prototype that you've built. Playtesting when it comes to video games is the single most important activity a designer can engage in. And ironically, it is also the one which most designers understand the least about. There's a really good book called Game Design Workshop by Tracy Fullerton, and she talks about a lot of playtesting and the approach to playtesting in there as well. But essentially, the goal of playtesting is it's something you do throughout the entire gamification design process in order to gain insight into the impact of your design. You want to gain useful feedback from users to improve the overall experience of the gamification, and playtesting should essentially tell us if your gamification is achieving your behavioral goals or not. And it's not market testing, game balancing, or quality assurance testing. It's all about the fun and whether your prototype is succeeding or not. So generally, you want to playtest as much and as early as possible. So when we talk about iterative design, we talk about playtesting as soon as possible. And so with this process, evaluation of your prototype or your idea happens early and often. And there are many different approaches to playtesting. When you give someone your design, your gamification design, you can do things such as watching them directly. You can get them to talk aloud and tell them what they're thinking. You can ask questions as well and interview them. And then there are more technical approaches which you can take as well. But essentially, you want to design, prototype, and then evaluate how your prototype is doing. And then you can use the results of those playtests to then tweak your design and improve it before bringing out another version of it. So the idea now is to think about how could you build something in a day, and then how could you test something in a day, and then how could you know it's been successful as well. Okay, great. Whew, we have covered a lot. That is a lot for 2 hours. Usually, this is everything we've talked about today. We cover in an entire semester at university, but we've managed to cover a lot of different topics in just under 2 hours, which is excellent. So that is the gamification design process. We've talked about a lot of things today. I've given you a brief introduction to gamification. We've talked about how you can identify goals to tackle, how you can understand your players using the gamer motivation model, how you can design gamification or get started with gamification, and how you can make it happen. I'm going to leave it there. I think that's enough for today. So now I'll open up the floor. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them. And feel free to share questions via chat, or if you want to get in touch with me later as well, that would be great.
Hey, so Zach, first of all, thanks for all this information and content. I hope everybody enjoyed this so much as I did. And yeah, I don't know if the people watching are gonna send us some questions or not. So I believe we'll have to wait for some minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good. We do have some questions already in here.
Yeah.
So Dania has one from earlier talking about what is the difference between flow and addiction. So this is a really interesting one, I guess. We talk about addiction a lot, that people can get addicted to games as well, that, sometimes particular game design methods can lead to addictive experiences. I guess when we talk about the theory of flow, it's a little bit different to addiction in the sense that, when you're engaged with an activity, you're completely motivated to undertake that activity. You're usually intrinsically motivated. When we talk about addiction, there's usually some kind of external motivation. So we're motivated because, we want money or we want to experience something. It's an interesting one. Generally, when we talk about game experiences, you enter games willfully, so you are choosing to enter or to play that particular game. When we talk about addiction, though, it's usually when there are particular design practices or processes which people are implementing because we know they can be quite effective. The topic of ethics and gamification is an interesting one as well. And I guess it comes down to a lot to the designer as well. And that is, there's this concept of ethical gamification. You need to make sure that with what your goals and the behaviors that you're trying to promote, that generally as a designer with anything you should design or with anything that you're designing, that you are taking an ethical approach. And I guess we're seeing things being banned such as loot boxes, things that are related to gambling in various countries and things, because they either can be quite addictive in terms of encouraging people to play or to spend money. So yeah, it's interesting. There's an interesting area as well of dark UX patterns where people design certain processes or interfaces in order to promote things like, getting people to sign up to things without realizing, etc. And so yeah, it's an interesting one to think of, and something that needs to be considered in the design of anything, really. Oh, Ramon, I think you're muted.
So thanks for the answer.
Mm.
There was two questions. One from Dania. She would like to use the audio to ask you.
Sure.
So Dania, if you can unmute yourself and make the question.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
I didn't know if we can just open the mic.
No, this is great.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I was wondering, when you talked about that game where the Pokemon was over there and millions of people were playing all the time, and you just said something about people start to walk more, and that wasn't the purpose of the game. They had another purpose. But when you see it through this perspective, can you say that through this perspective it was gamification? And when you see, okay, you got what my
yes, no, it's a really interesting one. And what is gamification and what is not gamification is a really interesting topic, which a lot of academics talk about.
But right now, like when I'm using in my company, when I use something that is not gamification, because it doesn't have, like, it's just a reward. It doesn't have motivation, doesn't have anything. It's just like, you will win this if you do this. It's not gamification. And people, they want to use this word. I say you cannot use gamification. You can use whatever you want. Like, it's a bonus, it's a promotion. And people, they don't have the idea of gamification. They don't know that there's all the element, the project, the process, and they just use it. Yes. And they think everything is gamification. So besides being like the game, the real game being gamified, as I said, like for health,
yes,
like the Pokemon, and the prototype of the game, like those three situations. Sorry, I have like 4 dogs.
That's okay.
Those 3 situations, it's a conflict. So when we are taking it serious and we really want to gamify, people are not ready through the theory to understand what we're doing, and it's a whole process. And you want to say, like, the game is serious. Game is not just a game. Like, it's a whole model of business. It's a business model sometimes, if you want to. But this is how can we explain? Is there any theory that we can use, that everybody uses, not just the octalysis and stuff, but things that we can prove that this is genuine and it's not just...
So this is really interesting. It's a lot to unpack here. So the first one, the question around Pokemon Go, it's interesting because it's designed around walking. So I'm sure the designers had some intent that they want to get people out there and walking as well. But I guess from their perspective, it comes down to designers' intent in terms of what is gamification and what is not gamification. So if the primary purpose is to create an entertaining experience, then some people might argue that's more of a game than gamification, but it has health benefits because you're creating an augmented reality game which gets people out and walking. if you look at Niantic's recent game that they just released this week called Pikmin Go, I think it is, or Pikmin, that's very much all around walking and encouraging people to get out and walk, which is great. So it seems like the design around that is more intended on promoting behavior change in terms of getting out and exercising. It can be difficult. Defining gamification is really hard because a lot of us really don't understand what gamification is. And it is easy to think that, yes, it's just adding rewards and just hoping that, or incentives, and then that will then promote behavior change. But I guess one of the most important things to consider is to go back to looking at motivation. And we didn't really touch upon it today, or I didn't talk about it in too much, but this concept of two different types of motivation. There's extrinsic motivation, where we're motivated by something externally, whether, we want praise, we're trying to avoid punishment, we want a raise, we want some money, or some kind of external thing that's motivating us, versus intrinsic motivation, where we are doing something because internally we enjoy that particular activity. And if we look at the two different things, if we look at rewards or bonuses or raises, they're very much tied to extrinsic motivation, whereas more traditional video game design is tied to intrinsic motivation. We're playing video games not because anyone's paying us to play video games, but because we enjoy playing video games. We are internally motivated. And so you've got those two theories, the theory of flow and self-determination theory, which help explain why video games are so motivating. There's a really good book called Drive by Daniel Pink. I would recommend reading that one as well, because he talks about the differences between rewards and incentives versus creating an activity, especially within a business context, more motivating and engaging. And then in terms of perfect. Yeah, that's great. And then in terms of explaining it, yeah, I sometimes call gamification just behavior change design because it's easier.
Okay. That's why I ask about an MVP. Like, is there a minimum so you can call it? But I understood what you said.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thanks so much for the question.
Okay.
And Edna has asked a question: how would gamification tackle a situation where motivation to start the task is the issue rather than motivation to keep doing it? So yeah, this is a really interesting one as well. When we talk about gamification design, when we talk about behaviors, there's generally two different types of behaviors. There's a single one-off behavior, like getting someone to download your app for the first time, to onboard, to sign up for an account. That's something that they'll only do once. And then you're talking about habit formation as the other type of behavior, where you're encouraging a new habit. You're trying to encourage people to walk 10,000 steps every day, or to come back and use your app regularly in order to get some kind of value. So there's gamification that works for both, these one-off kind of activities, and there's and for the habit forming activities as well. And for these one-off activities, like, for example, the piano stairs, which I guess is trying to encourage people to take the stairs more often. So that is kind of more habit forming. But gamification can be used, light touch gamification, rewards, incentives, making it as easy as possible to do as well is something that's really important for these one-off tasks or one-off behaviors that we want to promote. So that's when you may look at more extrinsic rewards, where you may look at ways in which to promote people to, or make it as easy as possible to perform that one-off behavior. I hope that answers your question, Edna.
Great. So Zach, I don't know if you have any more questions. Leonardo from YouTube just send you a congratulations. Well done presentation.
Awesome. Oh, I've got a question for everyone else. I would love everyone to quickly write one thing in the comment section, whether it's on YouTube or in Zoom, about the favorite thing that they learned today. So it could be your favorite example, or maybe what you plan on doing next. So do you plan on downloading or checking out some gamification examples, what you're looking at applying gamification? Have a quick think about it. I'd love you to share that quickly in the chat as well. On my website as well, I have a book called An Introduction to Gamification, which goes into some of these a lot more depth. It's a free book, so you can just jump on there to my website as well and download that book. But yeah, that's everything from me. Edna's going to try that forest app. Yeah, good idea, Edna. It's great. It's very good. It's the saddest thing of killing your trees when you get distracted by your phone with that particular app. So it's a good one to try, especially if you want to stay focused on a task.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. My greatest learn was the BMAP curve. That was very
Mm,
unexpected to to see for the first time. We have probably a last question from YouTube
sure.
from Leonardo. He asking in a classroom and considering that inside the classroom you have
Mm.
a lot of different profiles of gamers. Uh, how plan in doing something that can affect them all?
Mm. So that's a good question. The You can create essentially different game experience, quite short game experiences for your different students. So, you could have a competitive task, learning task that takes 5 to 10 minutes, but within that competitive task, you could have collaboration aspects to it as well, and you could have fantasy aspects to it. So you could support as many different player motivations as possible within that one task, or you can create a series of different tasks that support different motivation styles. So the first one could be a competitive one, but then the next activity or learning activity you do could be a collaborative one. So yeah, you can do things like that where you create a task which tries to support as many of the player motivations as possible, or you could create a series of different tasks where some people might not like the competitive part, but that's okay because you've got a collaborative one coming up next.
Great. I hope it's answered, Leonardo. I just mentioned the discussion about motivation was pretty cool too.
Mm. Yeah, we just touched a little bit on motivation. Those two theories are really interesting, and I encourage you to look more into the theory of flow. There's, again, a good book called Flow by Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. And there's also the self-determination theory. And for that, I recommend looking at Daniel Pink's book, Drive.
Yeah. So Zach, in behalf of everyone, I just want to thank you for
Yeah,
all the content, for all your knowledge and learning that you enlightened us. So yeah, great presentation. It was a pleasure to follow, to learn, and to be here with you.
awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great to have you all here. And yeah, look, keep in touch and let me know if you have any other questions. But yeah, I can't wait to see what you do in the area of gamification, especially if it's just as simple as checking out Kahoot and using that in the classroom or the workspace, or actually designing a full-fledged gamification project.
Nice. So
Awesome.
everyone, good night. Do some gamification process, gaming, anything. Use this knowledge for somehow.
And it's a good excuse
And
to play games. Play more games.
yeah. So that's it. Bye bye everyone. Bye
Awesome.
Zach, Fulton.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.